The opulent ballroom of the Riviera Grand Hotel buzzed with excitement as an army of workers scurried about, transforming the already lavish space into a fairy tale wedding venue. Crystal chandeliers twinkled overhead, their light dancing off the polished marble floors. Cascades of white roses and orchids adorned every surface, their heady perfume filling the air with the promise of romance and new beginnings. At the center of this whirlwind of activity stood James Montero, the handsome heir to the Montero fortune. His piercing blue eyes sparkled with joy as he oversaw the preparations for what was to be the wedding of the century. At 28, James had it all: looks, charm, and a bank account that could make small countries weep with envy. But it wasn't until he met Eva that he felt his life was truly complete. "James, darling," a melodious voice cut through the chaos, and James turned to see his mother, Sophia Montero, gliding towards him. Her tailored Chanel suit and impeccable coiffure were a stark contrast to the bustle around them. "Have you heard from your father? He was supposed to be here an hour ago to approve the seating arrangements." James sighed, running a hand through his perfectly styled dark hair. "You know Dad, Mom. He's probably caught up in some last-minute business deal. I'm sure he'll be here soon." Sophia's perfectly painted lips pursed in disapproval. "This wedding is the most important day of your life, James. Your father should be here, supporting you, not chasing after another million." Before James could respond, a commotion near the entrance caught their attention. Victor Montero, patriarch of the Montero family and one of the wealthiest men in the country, strode into the ballroom. His commanding presence seemed to part the sea of workers effortlessly. "Dad," James called out, relief evident in his voice. "You made it." Victor's stern features softened as he approached his son. "Of course I made it. I wouldn't miss this for the world." He clapped James on the shoulder, a rare display of affection from the usually stoic businessman. "Now, where's this bride of yours? I can't wait to finally meet the woman who's stolen my son's heart." James beamed, his excitement palpable. "Eva's with her parents, going over some last-minute details. She should be here any minute now." As if on cue, the grand doors of the ballroom swung open once more. A hush fell over the room as Eva Ramirez stepped inside, flanked by her adoptive parents, Maria and Carlos. Eva was a vision in a simple white sundress, her long dark hair cascading down her back in loose waves. Her olive skin seemed to glow from within, and her warm brown eyes lit up as they landed on James. She moved with a grace that belied her humble origins, captivating everyone in her path. James felt his heart skip a beat, just as it had the first time he'd laid eyes on her in that little coffee shop 6 months ago. He still couldn't believe that this amazing woman had agreed to marry him after such a whirlwind romance. As Eva approached, James reached out to take her hand, bringing it to his lips for a gentle kiss. "You look beautiful," he murmured, his eyes never leaving hers. Eva blushed, a shy smile playing on her lips. "Thank you," she whispered back, before turning to face James's parents. "Mr. and Mrs. Montero, it's so wonderful to finally meet you." Sophia stepped forward, enveloping Eva in a warm embrace. "Oh, my dear, the pleasure is all ours. Welcome to the family." Victor, however, remained rooted to the spot, his face a mask of shock and disbelief. As Eva turned to greet him, he stumbled backward, his usual composure completely shattered. "Victor?" Sophia's concerned voice cut through the sudden tension. "What's wrong?" Victor's eyes were wide, his face pale as if he'd seen a ghost. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. His gaze remained fixed on Eva, who was now looking increasingly uncomfortable under his intense scrutiny. "Dad?" James stepped forward, placing a steadying hand on his father's arm. "Are you all right?" Victor finally managed to tear his eyes away from Eva, looking at his son with a mixture of confusion and something that looked almost like fear. I'm fine," he stammered, clearly anything but. Just a bit overwhelmed, I suppose." Eva, ever gracious, attempted to smooth over the awkward moment. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Montero. James has told me so much about you." Victor nodded mechanically, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Yes, of course. Welcome, Eva. I apologize for my behavior. Please, Excuse me for a moment." Without another word, Victor turned on his heel and strode out of the ballroom, leaving a wake of confused silence behind him. James exchanged a bewildered look with his mother before turning to Eva with an apologetic smile. "I'm so sorry about that, Eva. I don't know what got into him. Maybe the stress of the wedding is getting to him more than we realized." Eva nodded, but James couldn't help noticing the hint of hurt in her eyes. He squeezed her hand reassuringly, vowing silently to get to the bottom of his father's strange behavior. Little did James know that this was just the beginning. The perfect fairy tale he thought he was living was about to unravel in ways he could never have imagined. As Victor Montero stood alone in the hotel corridor, his mind reeling from the shock of recognition, the ghosts of his past began to stir, threatening to destroy everything he held dear. For in Eva's face, Victor had seen the unmistakable features of a child he had lost long ago, a child he had never stopped searching for, a child whose disappearance had haunted him for 2 decades. And now, by some cruel twist of fate, that child was about to marry his son. As the sounds of laughter and music drifted from the ballroom, Victor Montero leaned against the wall, his world spinning around him. He closed his eyes, memories flooding back. Memories of a little girl with Eva's eyes, of a tragic accident, of years of fruitless searching. How could this be possible? And more importantly, what was he going to do now? The stage was set for a drama that would shake the Montero family to its very core. As the wedding preparations continued inside, oblivious to the storm brewing, Victor Montero stood at a crossroads. The choice he would make in the coming days would change lives forever, testing the bonds of family, love, and loyalty in ways no one could have foreseen. The clock was ticking, the truth a ticking time bomb waiting to explode. And at the center of it all, 2 young lovers remained blissfully unaware that their perfect happiness was built on a foundation of long-buried secrets and lies. The wedding of the century was about to become the scandal of a lifetime. The cool evening air did little to calm Victor Montero's racing thoughts as he stood on the balcony of his penthouse suite, overlooking the glittering city below. In his trembling hands, he held a crystal tumbler of aged scotch, untouched despite his desperate need for something to steady his nerves. The events of the afternoon played on an endless loop in his mind, each recollection bringing a fresh wave of panic and disbelief. Eva's face, those eyes, that smile, how could he have missed it? How could fate be so cruel as to bring his long-lost daughter back into his life as his son's fiancée? A soft knock at the door startled Victor from his reverie. "Victor?" Sophia's concerned voice drifted through the room. "Darling, are you all right?" Composing himself, Victor turned to face his wife as she entered the suite. Sophia's elegant features were marred with worry, her eyes searching his face for answers. "I'm fine, Sophia," Victor lied, forcing a smile that felt more like a grimace. "Just a bit overwhelmed by all the wedding preparations, I suppose." Sophia wasn't fooled. After 30 years of marriage, she could read her husband like an open book. "Victor Montero, don't you dare try to deceive me," she said, her tone softening as she approached him. "I saw your face when you met Eva. What's going on?" Victor's shoulders sagged under the weight of his secret. For a moment, he considered confiding in Sophia, sharing the burden that threatened to crush him. But the words stuck in his throat. How could he explain something he barely understood himself? "It's nothing, my dear," he said finally, reaching out to caress her cheek. "I just need some time to process everything. Our little boy is getting married, after all." Sophia studied him for a long moment before nodding reluctantly. "All right, if you say so. But Victor, please don't let whatever's bothering you ruin this special time for James and Eva. They deserve our full support." As Sophia left the room, Victor's guilt gnawed at him. He knew she was right, but how could he pretend everything was normal when his world had just been turned upside down? Across the city, in a modest apartment far removed from the opulence of the Montero penthouse, Eva Ramirez sat at her vanity, brushing her long dark hair before bed. The excitement of the day had given way to a nagging unease, centered around Victor Montero's strange reaction to her. "Mija?" Maria Ramirez's gentle voice interrupted Eva's thoughts. "Are you okay? You've been quiet since we got home." Eva set down her brush, meeting her adoptive mother's concerned gaze in the mirror. "I'm fine, Mama, it's just. Did you notice anything odd about Mr. Montero today? The way he looked at me, it was like he'd seen a ghost. Maria's eyes flickered with an emotion Eva couldn't quite place before she schooled her features into a reassuring smile. Oh, honey, I'm sure it was nothing. He was probably just surprised by how beautiful you are. You know how these rich types can be, always expecting the worst when their children marry outside their social circle. Eva nodded, but the knot in her stomach didn't loosen. There had been something in Victor Montero's eyes, a flash of recognition, followed by fear, that she couldn't shake. Mama, Eva began hesitantly, do you ever think about my birth parents? Who they were, why they gave me up? Maria's smile faltered for just a moment before she enveloped Eva in a warm embrace. Oh, mija, you know we love you as if you were our own flesh and blood. Does it really matter where you came from? Eva returned the hug, pushing down the familiar ache that always accompanied thoughts of her mysterious origins. No, of course not. I was just curious, that's all. As Maria bid her good night and left the room, Eva's gaze fell on an old, battered shoebox hidden in the back of her closet. Inside were the few clues she had about her past: a tattered baby blanket, a broken locket, and a handful of documents from the orphanage where she'd spent her first few years. With trembling hands, Eva retrieved the box and began to sift through its contents. She'd gone over these items countless times before, searching for any hint of who she really was. But tonight, something compelled her to look again. As she unfolded the yellowed paperwork from the orphanage, a small newspaper clipping fluttered to the floor. Eva picked it up, her heart racing as she read the faded headline: Wealthy Industrialist's Daughter Still Missing After Tragic Accident. The article was incomplete, the rest of it torn away, but Eva's eyes locked onto a grainy photograph accompanying the text. Though the image was blurry and water-damaged, she could just make out the face of a man who looked remarkably like a younger Victor Montero. Eva's mind reeled. Could it be possible? Was there some connection between her past and the Montero family? The idea seemed absurd, like something out of a soap opera, and yet. Across town, in his luxurious home office, James Montero sat hunched over his laptop, a frown creasing his handsome features. His father's bizarre behavior at the hotel had set off alarm bells, and James was determined to get to the bottom of it. As he scrolled through old news articles and public records, a pattern began to emerge. 25 years ago, the Montero family had been at the center of a media frenzy, not because of a business deal or society scandal, but because of a tragic loss. James's breath caught in his throat as he read the headline: Montero heiress presumed dead after boating accident. The article detailed how Victor and Sophia's young daughter, Isabella, had vanished during a family vacation. Despite exhaustive searches, no trace of the child had ever been found. The dates aligned perfectly. If Isabella had survived somehow, she would be exactly Eva's age now. James shook his head, trying to dispel the wild theories forming in his mind. It was impossible. Eva had grown up in a modest family, adopted from an orphanage. There was no way she could be. And yet, the seed of doubt had been planted. James thought back to all the little moments that had struck him as odd: Eva's innate grace that seemed at odds with her humble upbringing, her inexplicable knowledge of fine wines and art, the nightmares she sometimes had of water and darkness. As the pieces started to fall into place, James felt a cold dread settle in the pit of his stomach. If his suspicions were correct, the implications were earth-shattering. Not just for him and Eva, but for his entire family. Meanwhile, in a dimly lit bar on the outskirts of town, Carlos Ramirez nursed a glass of cheap whiskey, his weathered face etched with lines of worry. He'd recognized the look on Victor Montero's face earlier that day. It was the look of a man whose past had come back to haunt him. Carlos had always known this day might come. From the moment he and Maria had taken in the little girl from the orphanage, he'd lived with the fear that someday, someone would come looking for her. They'd done their best to protect Eva, to give her a normal life, but deep down, Carlos had always known their happiness was built on a fragile foundation of secrets and lies. As he signaled the bartender for another drink, Carlos's mind wandered back to that fateful night 25 years ago. The storm, the screams, the tiny bundle thrust into his arms by a desperate stranger. He'd made a choice that night, a choice that had given him and Maria the daughter they'd always longed for. But at what cost? Carlos downed his drink, grimacing at the burn. He knew what he had to do. For Eva's sake, for the sake of the family that had loved and raised her, he had to make sure the truth stayed buried. Even if it meant confronting Victor Montero himself. As dawn broke over the city, 4 individuals lay awake, each grappling with the weight of secrets and the fear of what the coming days might bring. Victor Montero, tormented by the ghosts of his past and the impossible choice that lay before him. Eva Ramirez, her world tilted on its axis by the hint of a connection to the family she was about to marry into. James Montero, his mind racing with suspicions that threatened to shatter his perfect life. And Carlos Ramirez, steeling himself for a conference. The stage was set for a drama of Shakespearean proportions. Love, loss, betrayal, and redemption hung in the balance as the clock ticked down to what was supposed to be the happiest day of Eva and James's lives. Little did they know that the path to the altar would be paved with shocking revelations, heart-wrenching choices, and the kind of twists that only fate, or a particularly sadistic telenovela writer, could devise. As the sun rose higher in the sky, casting a golden glow over the awakening city, the players in this unfolding drama began to stir. In the Montero penthouse, Victor emerged from his study, dark circles under his eyes betraying his sleepless night. He moved with the determined stride of a man who had made a difficult decision. "Sophia," he called out, his voice hoarse. "I need to speak with you. It's important." In her modest bedroom, Eva carefully folded the newspaper clipping and tucked it into her purse. Her hand lingered on the old shoebox for a moment before she pushed it back into the depths of her closet. Whatever answers lay in her past, she was determined to find them, even if it meant asking uncomfortable questions. Across town, James slammed his laptop shut, running a hand through his disheveled hair. The weight of his discoveries pressed down on him, threatening to suffocate him. He needed to talk to Eva, to his father, to anyone who could help him make sense of the tangled web he'd uncovered. And in a small, run-down apartment, Carlos Ramirez steeled himself for the conversation he'd been dreading for 25 years. He dialed a number with trembling fingers, his heart pounding as he waited for an answer. Victor Montero's office, a crisp, professional voice answered. Carlos took a deep breath. "This is Carlos Ramirez. I need to speak with Mr. Montero immediately. It's about Eva." The wheels were in motion. Secrets long buried were clawing their way to the surface, threatening to tear apart the lives of all involved. As the city bustled with the usual morning traffic, oblivious to the drama unfolding in its midst, the stage was set for a day that would change everything. The truth, so long suppressed, was finally ready to be revealed. But at what cost? And would love, be it the love between parent and child, between lovers, or between those who had sacrificed everything to protect an innocent girl, be strong enough to weather the storm that was about to break? Only time would tell. And in this high-stakes game of secrets and lies, time was quickly running out. The morning sun had barely crested the horizon when Victor Montero's private elevator whisked him to the top floor of Montero Industries' gleaming skyscraper. His usually impeccable appearance was marred by the shadows under his eyes and the slight tremor in his hands as he strode into his office. "Mr. Montero," his assistant called out, hurrying after him with a stack of messages. "You have several urgent calls, and..." Victor waved her off. "Cancel everything. I'm not to be disturbed under any circumstances." He paused, then added, "except for one thing. If a man named Carlos Ramirez calls, put him through immediately." The assistant nodded, her brow furrowed with concern, but she knew better than to question her boss's orders. As the heavy oak door closed behind Victor, she couldn't help but wonder what could have rattled the usually unflappable tycoon so thoroughly. Inside his office, Victor sank into his leather chair, his gaze drawn to the framed photographs on his desk. There was James, grinning proudly at his college graduation. Sophia, radiant on their 30th wedding anniversary. And tucked behind the others, a faded picture of a laughing toddler with familiar dark eyes, Isabella, the daughter he had lost so long ago. Victor's hand shook as he reached for the photo. "I'm so sorry, my darling," he whispered. "I failed you once. I won't fail you again." The intercom buzzed, startling Victor from his reverie. "Mr. Montero," his assistant's voice crackled through the speaker. "I have Carlos Ramirez on line 1. Victor's heart raced as he reached for the phone. This was it, the moment of truth. "Put him through," he said, his voice steady despite the turmoil within. "Mr. Montero." Carlos's gruff voice filled the line. "We need to talk." "Yes, we do," Victor agreed, his grip tightening on the receiver. "About Eva." There was a long pause, filled with the weight of 2 decades of secrets. Finally, Carlos spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "You know, don't you?" "I suspected," Victor replied. "But I need to hear it from you. Is she my Isabella?" The silence that followed seemed to stretch for an eternity. When Carlos finally answered, his voice was thick with emotion. "Yes, she is." The world seemed to tilt on its axis as Victor absorbed the confirmation of his wildest hopes and deepest fears. Eva, the woman his son was about to marry, was indeed his long-lost daughter. The implications were staggering, the potential for heartbreak immeasurable. "How?" Victor managed to choke out. "How is this possible?" Carlos sighed heavily. "It's a long story, Mr. Montero. One I've been carrying for far too long. We need to meet, face to face. There's so much you need to know." As Victor agreed to a clandestine meeting later that day, neither man was aware that their conversation was not as private as they believed. In the outer office, Victor's assistant sat frozen at her desk, her hand still on the intercom button she had accidentally pressed. Her eyes were wide with shock as the magnitude of what she had just overheard sank in. Across town, in the cozy kitchen of the Ramirez home, Eva sat at the breakfast table, pushing her food around her plate. The newspaper clipping she had discovered the night before felt like it was burning a hole in her pocket, demanding action. "Mama," Eva began hesitantly, "I need to ask you something important." Maria Ramirez turned from the stove, her warm smile faltering as she took in her daughter's serious expression. "What is it, mija?" Eva took a deep breath. "I need to know the truth about where I came from. About my birth parents." The spatula in Maria's hand clattered to the floor. "Eva, we've talked about this," she said, her voice strained. "We adopted you because we loved you. Isn't that enough?" "It was," Eva replied, her eyes filling with tears. "But something's not right, Mama. I can feel it. Please, I need to know." Maria sank into the chair across from Eva, her face etched with a mixture of fear and resignation. "Oh, my darling girl," she whispered. "I always knew this day would come. But I never imagined it would be like this." As Maria began to speak, her voice trembling with the weight of long-held secrets, neither woman noticed Carlos slipping out the back door, his face pale with dread. Meanwhile, in a trendy cafe in the heart of the city, James Montero sat nursing a cold cup of coffee, his laptop open before him. The results of his late-night research were displayed on the screen, each line of text a damning piece of evidence that threatened to unravel his entire world. "James?" A familiar voice cut through his troubled thoughts. "What are you doing here so early?" James looked up to see Eva standing before him, her beautiful face creased with concern. His heart clenched at the sight of her. How could he tell her what he had discovered? How could he shatter the life they had planned together? "Eva," he said, his voice hoarse. "We need to talk." As Eva slid into the seat across from him, James struggled to find the right words. "How do you tell the woman you love that she might be your long-lost sister?" "James, what's wrong?" Eva reached across the table to take his hand. "You're scaring me." James took a deep breath, steeling himself for the conversation that would change everything. "Eva, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. What do you know about your birth parents?" Eva's eyes widened, her hand tightening on James's. "It's funny you should ask that," she said slowly. "I was just talking to my mother about it this morning. James, I think there might be a connection between my past and your family." As the couple began to share their separate discoveries, the pieces of the puzzle slowly falling into place, they were unaware of the drama unfolding across the city. In a secluded corner of a rundown bar, Victor Montero sat across from Carlos Ramirez, both men looking years older than they had just days before. The weight of their shared secret hung heavy in the air between them. "Start from the beginning," Victor said, his voice low and intense. "I need to know everything." Carlos nodded, taking a long swig of his drink before speaking. "It was a stormy night, 25 years ago," he began. "Maria and I were driving along the coast when we saw a car that had gone off the road. We stopped to help in." As Carlos recounted the events of that fateful night, the desperate woman thrusting a child into Maria's arms, the whispered plea to keep her safe, the subsequent disappearance of both the woman and the wrecked car, Victor felt as though he was reliving his own nightmare. "We tried to find out who she was," Carlos continued, his voice rough with emotion. "But there was no trace. It was like they had vanished into thin air. We couldn't just abandon the child, so you kept her," Victor finished, his tone a mixture of gratitude and anguish. "You raised my daughter as your own." Carlos nodded, unable to meet Victor's gaze. "We loved her, Mr. Montero. We gave her everything we could. But we always knew this day might come." As the two men grappled with the implications of their shared past, neither noticed the figure lurking in the shadows nearby. A phone held up to capture every word of their conversation. Across town, in the luxurious Montero mansion, Sophia paced the length of her private sitting room, her usually calm demeanor shattered by the bomb Victor had dropped before rushing out that morning. "Eva is Isabella," she murmured to herself, the words still sounding impossible even as she spoke them aloud. "Our daughter is alive, and she's about to marry her own brother." The sound of shattering glass startled Sophia from her thoughts. She whirled around to see her personal maid standing in the doorway, a broken teacup at her feet and a look of abject horror on her face. "Mrs. Montero," the maid gasped. "I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to overhear, but, did you say Miss Eva is your daughter?" Sophia's blood ran cold as she realized the magnitude of her careless words. In her shock and distress, she had forgotten the cardinal rule of high society: the walls always have ears. "Rosa," Sophia said, her voice trembling slightly. "What you heard, it's complicated. You mustn't breathe a word of this to anyone. Do you understand?" But even as Rosa nodded, her eyes wide with the thrill of such a scandalous secret, Sophia knew it was too late. In a world where gossip traveled faster than light, the truth, or some version of it, would soon be spreading like wildfire. As the morning wore on, the separate threads of deception and discovery began to intertwine, drawing the key players inexorably toward a confrontation that would change their lives forever. Eva and James, their heads bent close together in the cafe, pieced together the fragments of their shared history, each revelation bringing them closer to a truth that threatened to tear them apart. Victor and Carlos, bound by a secret decades in the making, grappled with the consequences of their past choices and the impossible decisions that lay ahead. Sophia, trapped in a gilded cage of her own making, fought to contain a truth that was already slipping through her fingers. And in the shadows, unseen forces worked to ensure that no secret would remain buried, no lie would go unexposed. The stage was set for a revelation that would rock the foundations of the Montero Empire and redefine the meaning of family for all involved. As the clock ticked relentlessly forward, counting down the hours until the wedding that now seemed both impossible and inevitable, the players in this high-stakes drama found themselves hurtling toward a collision course with destiny. In a quiet corner of the city's most exclusive jewelry store, an elderly craftsman put the finishing touches on a custom-made locket. The piece was exquisite, a delicate gold heart adorned with tiny diamonds. But it was the inscription inside that held the real value: "To our beloved Isabella, forever in our hearts." The craftsman carefully placed the locket in a velvet box, unaware that this small token of love and remembrance would soon become the key to unlocking a mystery 2 decades in the making. As the morning sun climbed higher in the sky, casting long shadows across the city, the separate threads of this tangled web began to draw tighter, pulling the unsuspecting players toward a confrontation that would leave no life unchanged. In the Montero mansion, Sophia's trembling fingers dialed a familiar number. "Victor," she said as soon as her husband answered, "we have a problem. The staff, they know." At the cafe, James and Eva sat in stunned silence, the implications of their discoveries hanging heavy between them. "What do we do now?" Eva whispered, her voice barely audible over the bustling morning crowd. And in the dingy bar across town, Victor Montero and Carlos Ramirez raised their glasses in a grim toast. "To the truth," Victor said, his voice thick with emotion. "May it set us free, or damn us all." As the city awakened to what promised to be another ordinary day, none of its inhabitants could have imagined the storm that was brewing, a tempest of secrets, lies, and long-buried truths that would soon break over them all, leaving no one untouched in its wake. The stage was set, the players were in motion, and the final act of this grand and terrible drama was about to begin. In the coming hours, lives would be forever altered, hearts would be broken and mended, and the very foundations of love, family, and identity would be put to the ultimate test. For in the world of high society and even higher stakes, no secret stays buried forever, and the price of truth can be higher than anyone is prepared to pay. The midday sun beat down mercilessly on the city, its scorching rays a fitting backdrop to the firestorm of emotions raging within the hearts of those caught in the web of secrets and lies. As the hours ticked relentlessly towards the ill-fated wedding, the key players in this unfolding drama found themselves racing against time, each desperate to control the narrative before it spiraled beyond their grasp. At the Montero Industries headquarters, Victor sat behind his massive mahogany desk, his usually commanding presence diminished by the weight of his newfound knowledge. Across from him, Sophia perched on the edge of her seat, her perfectly manicured nails tapping an anxious rhythm on the armrest. "We have to tell them, Victor," Sophia insisted, her voice trembling. "James and Eva deserve to know the truth before it's too late." Victor's hand clenched around the delicate gold locket he'd retrieved from the jeweler that morning. The inscription inside seemed to mock him with its bittersweet promise, "To our beloved Isabella, forever in our hearts." "And destroy their happiness?" Victor countered, his tone sharp with barely contained anguish. "Rip apart the family that raised Eva? Expose our failure to protect our own child? There has to be another way." Sophia's eyes flashed with a mixture of anger and desperation. "What other way could there possibly be, Victor? They're about to commit." She couldn't bring herself to finish the sentence, the word, incest, hanging unspoken but palpable between them. Before Victor could respond, a sharp knock at the door interrupted their tense exchange. His assistant entered, her face pale and her hands shaking as she clutched a tablet to her chest. "Mr. and Mrs. Montero," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm so sorry, but you need to see this." She turned the tablet towards them, revealing a breaking news headline that sent a chill down their spines. "Montero wedding scandal. Lost heiress found in groom's arms?" Victor's roar of rage echoed through the office as he snatched the tablet, his eyes scanning the article with growing horror. Somehow, the story had leaked, a garbled version of the truth, filled with salacious speculation and damning half-truths. "How?" Sophia gasped, her hand flying to her throat. "Who could have?" But even as she spoke, the pieces fell into place. The maid's shocked expression, the whispers among the staff, the lightning speed of high society gossip. Their secret, so carefully guarded for decades, had slipped through their fingers like sand. Across town, in the modest Ramirez home, a similar scene of chaos was unfolding. Eva sat on the worn living room sofa, her eyes red-rimmed and unfocused as she stared at the cell phone in her lap. The screen was alight with a barrage of notifications, missed calls, text messages, and social media alerts, all clamoring for her attention. "Mija," Maria Ramirez pleaded, hovering anxiously nearby. "Please, let us explain. We only wanted to protect you." But Eva seemed beyond hearing, lost in a haze of shock and betrayal. The life she had known, the identity she had built for herself, it had all been a carefully constructed lie. And now, with the truth exploding across headlines and social media, she felt as though she was being torn apart, her very sense of self unraveling with each passing moment. Carlos burst through the front door, his face ashen. "It's everywhere," he panted, clutching a handful of newspapers. "The story. They're saying Eva is the lost Montero heiress. That she and James are siblings," Eva finished, her voice hollow. She looked up at the people she had called her parents for as long as she could remember, her eyes blazing with a mixture of hurt and fury. How could you keep this from me? All these years, did you ever plan to tell me the truth? Maria fell to her knees beside Eva, reaching for her daughter's hand. Oh, my darling, we wanted to. So many times, we came close. But we were afraid. Afraid of losing you, afraid of what the truth might do to you. And now? Eva's laugh was bitter, tinged with hysteria. Now the whole world knows before I do. My entire life is a lie, and I found out from a gossip column. As the Ramirez family grappled with the fallout of their long-held secret, across the city, James Montero found himself in the eye of the storm. Holed up in his penthouse apartment, he paced back and forth, running his hands through his disheveled hair as he struggled to make sense of the chaos that had engulfed his life. His phone buzzed incessantly, calls from friends, family, and vulture-like reporters all demanding answers he didn't have. The televisions in every room blared with breaking news updates, each one more sensational than the last. Montero heir in incestuous engagement shock. Lost heiress returns. A modern-day Oedipus tale. Montero Industries stock plummets amid family scandal. James felt as though he was drowning, suffocating under the weight of a truth too bizarre and horrifying to comprehend. Eva, his fiancée, the woman he loved more than life itself, was his sister. The mere thought made his stomach churn. A soft ping from his laptop drew his attention. An email from an unknown sender, with a single line of text. The truth will set you free, but first it will break you. Attached was a video file. With trembling hands, James clicked play, and found himself watching grainy security camera footage of his father and Carlos Ramirez in a seedy bar, their hushed conversation about Eva's true identity playing out in damning detail. As the full extent of the deception unfolded before him, James felt something inside him snap. The hurt, the betrayal, the sheer magnitude of the lies that had shaped his life. It was too much to bear. In a fit of rage, he swept his arm across the desk, sending his laptop and a collection of framed family photos crashing to the floor. As he stood there, chest heaving and surrounded by the wreckage of his former life, a cold resolve settled over him. It was time to take control of this narrative. Time to confront those who had played God with his life and the life of the woman he loved. With grim determination, James reached for his phone and dialed a familiar number. "Eva," he said when she answered, his voice tight with barely contained emotion. "We need to end this. On our terms. Are you with me?" Across the city, in a luxurious spa retreat, Veronica DuPont reclined on a massage table, a smug smile playing on her perfectly painted lips. As the masseuse worked out the tension in her shoulders, Veronica scrolled through the explosion of news articles on her tablet, each one more scandalous than the last. "Oh, Victor," she purred, her eyes gleaming with malicious triumph. "Did you really think you could keep such a delicious secret from me?" As the jilted ex-lover of Victor Montero and a ruthless social climber, Veronica had bided her time, waiting for the perfect moment to exact her revenge. And now, with a few well-placed phone calls and a carefully orchestrated leak to the press, she had brought the mighty Montero empire to its knees. But Veronica's victory celebration was short-lived. A breaking news alert flashed across her screen, causing her to bolt upright, nearly knocking the startled masseuse off her feet. Montero heirs to hold press conference. James and Eva promised to reveal all. Veronica's eyes narrowed as she read the announcement. This wasn't part of her plan. The Montero children were supposed to be devastated, hiding from the public eye while their parents' carefully constructed world crumbled around them. But this smacked of defiance, of a refusal to play the role of victim. With a snarl of frustration, Veronica leapt from the massage table, barking orders into her phone as she hastily dressed. She had worked too hard, waited too long for her revenge to let it slip through her fingers now. Whatever James and Eva had planned, she would be there to ensure that the Montero name was dragged through the mud, once and for all. As the afternoon wore on, the city seemed to hold its breath, an air of anticipation and dread hanging over the streets like a heavy fog. News vans clogged the roads around Montero Industries headquarters, reporters jockeying for position as they awaited the promised revelations. Inside the building, in a conference room high above the chaos below, the key players in this unfolding drama faced each other across a long mahogany table. The tension in the air was palpable, charged with hurt, anger, and the weight of decades of secrets. Victor and Sofia Montero sat at one end, their usual poise shattered, looking every bit their age under the harsh fluorescent lights. Across from them, Carlos and Maria Ramirez huddled together, their faces etched with guilt and fear. And at the head of the table stood James and Eva, united in their determination to take control of their narrative. They had arrived together, hand in hand, their expressions a mixture of resolve and barely contained emotion. "Before we face the world," James began, his voice steady despite the storm raging within him, "we deserve the whole truth. No more lies, no more half-truths or convenient omissions. We want to know everything, from the beginning." Eva nodded, her grip on James's hand tightening. "We've pieced together bits and pieces, but we need to hear it from you. All of you. How did this happen? How did I go from being Isabella Montero to Eva Ramirez? And how could you let us fall in love, knowing what you knew?" The room fell silent, the weight of 2 decades of secrets pressing down on them all. Finally, Victor cleared his throat, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "It was supposed to be a celebration," he began, his voice rough with emotion. "Your 3rd birthday, Isabella. We were on the yacht, just off the coast." As Victor recounted the events of that fateful day, the sudden storm, the freak wave that had swept little Isabella overboard, the days of frantic searching that had yielded nothing but heartbreak, the others listened in stunned silence. Carlos picked up the thread, describing how he and Maria had found the injured woman and the child by the side of the road, the whispered plea to keep the girl safe, and the years of doubt and fear that had followed their decision to raise Eva as their own. With each revelation, each painful truth laid bare, the atmosphere in the room shifted. The anger and betrayal that had fueled James and Eva began to give way to a more complex emotion, a mixture of grief for the lives they might have had, and gratitude for the love that had shaped them. As the last of the secrets were finally exposed, a heavy silence fell over the room. The truth, in all its messy, painful glory, lay between them like a living thing, demanding acknowledgement and, perhaps, forgiveness. Eva was the first to speak, her voice soft but firm. "I understand why you did what you did," she said, looking from the Ramirezes to the Monteros. "You all acted out of love, in your own ways. But understanding doesn't erase the hurt, the years of lies." James nodded, his jaw tight. "We can't change the past, but we can control what happens next. And we've made a decision." All eyes turned to the young couple, breaths held in anticipation of their next words. Whatever they decided would shape not only their own futures but the fate of both families and, quite possibly, the Montero Empire itself. "We're going to face this head-on," James declared, his voice gaining strength. "No more hiding, no more secrets. We'll tell our story, the whole truth, and let the world make of it what they will." Eva squeezed his hand, a sad smile playing on her lips. "We may have lost the future we thought we had, but we refuse to be victims. We are brother and sister, yes, but we're also 2 people who love each other. We'll find a way forward, on our own terms." As the implications of their words sank in, a mix of emotions played across the faces of their parents: relief, pride, and a lingering sadness for all that had been lost and could never be regained. Victor stood, moving around the table to stand before his children. "Whatever you decide, whatever comes next, know that we stand with you. Both of you. We've failed you in so many ways, but if you'll let us, we want to make it right." Tears glistened in Sophia's eyes as she joined her husband. "We've missed so much of your life, Eva. If you're willing, we'd like the chance to be a part of it now. Not to replace the family you've known, but to add to it." Maria and Carlos exchanged a look, years of unspoken fear and love passing between them. "You will always be our daughter, Eva," Maria said softly. "But we understand if you need time, if you need space to figure out who you are now." As the family, or rather, families, grappled with the new reality before them, a commotion outside the conference room door broke the emotional tension. Victor's assistant burst in, her face pale. "Mr. Montero, everyone, You need to see this, she gasped, turning on the large screen that dominated one wall of the room. The television flickered to life, revealing a breaking news broadcast. A reporter stood outside Montero Industries, her expression grave as she addressed the camera. In a shocking twist to the already sensational Montero family scandal, new evidence has come to light suggesting that the entire affair may be part of an elaborate revenge plot. Sources close to the family have provided documents and recordings that implicate Veronica DuPont, a former associate of Victor Montero, in orchestrating the leak of sensitive information. As the report continued, detailing Veronica's alleged involvement and her history with the Montero family, the atmosphere in the conference room shifted once again. The personal drama that had consumed them all suddenly expanded, taking on new dimensions of corporate intrigue and social manipulation. James and Eva exchanged a look, a silent communication passing between them. In that moment, they realized that their story, as painful and complicated as it was, had the power to be more than just a scandal. It could be a redemption, a chance to expose the true villains and perhaps, in the process, forge a new kind of family bond. I think, James said slowly, a hint of his old determination creeping back into his voice, that it's time we changed the narrative. Are you ready to face the world, sis? Eva nodded, straightening her shoulders. Let's give them a story they'll never forget, bro. As they moved towards the door, ready to face the sea of reporters and flashing cameras that awaited them, the others fell in behind them. A united front, bound by blood, love, and the unshakable truth that had finally set them all free. The stage was set for a press conference that would shake the city to its core, redefine the meaning of family, and prove once and for all that love, in all its complex and unconventional forms, could triumph over even the most sensational of scandals. The grand ballroom of the Riviera Grand Hotel, once destined to host the wedding of the year, now buzzed with a different kind of electric energy. Rows of chairs faced a raised platform where a long table draped in crisp white linen awaited the Montero family. Camera crews jostled for position, their equipment creating a sea of blinking red lights in the dimly lit room. Behind the scenes, in a luxurious green room, James and Eva stood side by side, staring at their reflections in an ornate mirror. The irony of their matching dark suits, once chosen for a very different kind of ceremony, was not lost on either of them. Ready for this? James asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Eva met his gaze in the mirror, her eyes filled with a mixture of determination and fear. As ready as I'll ever be. You? Before James could respond, the door burst open, and Sophia swept in, a whirlwind of designer perfume and nervous energy. Darlings, it's time. Remember, no matter what happens out there, we face it as a family. As they made their way towards the ballroom, Victor fell into step beside them, his usual commanding presence somewhat diminished by the weight of recent events. James, Eva, he began, his voice gruff with emotion, I want you to know how proud I am of both of you. Your courage, your grace under pressure. You're everything we could have hoped for in our children. The word, children, plural, hung in the air between them, a reminder of the bizarre twist of fate that had brought them to this moment. As they approached the ballroom doors, a cacophony of voices and camera flashes erupted. The Montero family paused for a moment, each taking a deep breath before stepping into the spotlight. The next hour passed in a blur of flashing cameras and rapid-fire questions. James and Eva, seated at the center of the long table, fielded the majority of the inquiries with a poise that belied their inner turmoil. Miss Montero, or should we say Miss Ramirez, how does it feel to discover your true identity after all these years? Eva leaned towards the microphone, her voice steady. It's Eva, just Eva, and to answer your question, it's overwhelming. I've gained a family I never knew I had, but I haven't lost the one that raised me. If anything, my heart has grown to encompass them all. Mr. Montero, another reporter called out, how do you reconcile your feelings for Eva, given the nature of your relationship? James's jaw tightened, but his voice remained calm. The love I feel for Eva hasn't changed. It's evolved, certainly, but it hasn't diminished. She's my sister, yes, but she's also my best friend, my confidant. We're navigating this new reality together. As the questions continued, Ranging from the deeply personal to the unavoidably sensational, the family held their ground. Victor and Sophia filled in the gaps of the story, detailing the tragic accident that had torn their family apart and the years of searching that had followed. Carlos and Maria Ramirez, seated slightly apart from the Monteros, spoke of the night they found Eva and their decision to raise her as their own. Their tearful apology to both Eva and the Monteros for keeping the secret for so long was met with a moment of poignant silence in the packed room. Just as the press conference seemed to be winding down, a commotion at the back of the ballroom drew everyone's attention. Veronica DuPont, looking decidedly less polished than usual, was attempting to push her way through the crowd of reporters. "This is all a lie," she shrieked, her eyes wild. "Victor Montero is a fraud. He knew about Eva all along. He abandoned her to protect his precious reputation." Security guards moved to intercept Veronica, but Victor held up a hand to stop them. He stood slowly, his expression a mix of pity and resolve. "Veronica," he said, his voice carrying easily over the sudden hush that had fallen over the room, "I think it's time we addressed your role in all of this." As Victor calmly detailed Veronica's attempts at blackmail and her orchestration of the information leak, the woman's face drained of color. By the time he finished, producing evidence of her machinations, Veronica's fight had left her. She sagged in the grip of the security guards, looking every bit the defeated villain in this real-life telenovela. With Veronica escorted from the premises, the mood in the ballroom shifted. The reporters, sensing that the real story was far more complex and human than they had initially believed, began to ask more thoughtful questions. "Eva, James," one seasoned journalist asked, her tone gentler than before, "what comes next for you both? For your families?" Eva and James exchanged a look, a lifetime of unspoken understanding passing between them in that moment. "We move forward," Eva said simply. "We heal. We learn to be a family, all of us, in whatever form that takes." James nodded, adding, "We've been given a second chance at a relationship we thought was lost forever. It may not be the relationship we originally envisioned, but it's no less valuable, no less full of love." As the press conference drew to a close, the Montero and Ramirez families stood together, presenting a united front to the flashing cameras. The image of these two families, once separate but now inextricably linked, would grace the front pages of newspapers around the world. In the days that followed, the story of the lost Montero heiress captivated the public imagination. But rather than the tawdry scandal many had anticipated, it became a tale of resilience, of family bonds that transcended biology, and of love that defied conventional boundaries. Eva moved into the Montero mansion, not to replace her life with the Ramirezes, but to bridge the gap between her two families. The sprawling estate became a hub of activity as both families worked to forge a new, unconventional dynamic. One sunny afternoon, about a week after the press conference, Eva found herself in the mansion's vast library. She stood before a wall of family portraits, her eyes fixed on a gap where her childhood photo should have been. "We'll have to get a new one taken," James's voice came from behind her. "Maybe we can do a big family portrait, all of us together." Eva turned, a small smile playing on her lips. "That would be nice. Chaotic, probably, but nice." James chuckled, moving to stand beside her. "Chaotic seems to be our new normal, doesn't it?" They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, shoulders just barely touching. The intimacy they had once shared had been replaced by something different, a bond that was no less strong, but fundamentally altered. "Do you ever wonder," Eva began hesitantly, "what might have happened if we hadn't found out? If we had gone through with the wedding?" James's expression grew serious. "Sometimes. But then I think about all we've gained. It's not the happy ending we thought we wanted, but maybe it's the one we needed." Before Eva could respond, the library door burst open, and Maria Ramirez bustled in, followed by a harried-looking Sophia. "There you are, mija," Maria exclaimed. "We've been looking everywhere for you. We need your opinion on the menu for Sunday's family dinner." Sophia nodded, adding, "And we need to discuss the press release about the new Montero Foundation for Adopted Children's Rights." "Your father thinks." "Our father," James corrected gently, earning a grateful smile from Eva. "Yes, of course," Sophia amended. Your father thinks we should emphasize the personal connection, but I believe. As their mothers launched into a spirited debate about public relations strategies, with Eva and James occasionally interjecting, the scene perfectly encapsulated their new reality. It was messy, complicated, and far from conventional, but it was theirs. Meanwhile, in his study, Victor Montero sat behind his massive desk, staring at a framed photo of a toddler Eva, or Isabella, as she had been then. He had missed so much of her life, and the weight of those lost years pressed heavily upon him. A soft knock at the door roused him from his thoughts. "Come in," he called out, quickly wiping away the moisture that had gathered in his eyes. Carlos Ramirez entered, looking slightly out of place in the opulent surroundings. "Mr. Montero," he began, then corrected himself, "Victor. I hope I'm not interrupting." Victor gestured for Carlos to take a seat. "Not at all. And please, call me Victor. After everything we've been through, I think we're well past formalities." Carlos nodded, settling into the plush leather chair across from Victor. An awkward silence stretched between them, two men who had shaped Eva's life in such different ways, now forced to find common ground. "I wanted to thank you," Victor finally said, his voice gruff with emotion. "For raising her, for giving her a good life. I know Maria and you love her as your own." Carlos's eyes misted over. "She is our own," he said firmly, then softened. "But she's yours too. We both gave her something the other couldn't. Maybe that's enough." The two men regarded each other for a long moment, years of unspoken gratitude and resentment passing between them. Finally, Victor stood and walked to a nearby cabinet, retrieving a bottle of fine scotch and 2 glasses. "A toast," he said, pouring a generous measure into each glass, "to fatherhood, in all its complicated, messy glory." As they clinked glasses, a tentative truce was formed. It wasn't perfect, and there would be many more difficult conversations to come, but it was a start. Across town, in a significantly less luxurious setting, Veronica DuPont sat in her lawyer's office, her once immaculate appearance now decidedly disheveled. "It's over, Veronica," her lawyer said, not unkindly. "The Monteros have agreed not to press charges if you agree to a full confession and a public apology. It's more than generous, considering the circumstances." Veronica's laugh was hollow. "Generous? They've destroyed me. My reputation, my social standing, it's all gone." The lawyer sighed, pushing a document across the desk. "You did this to yourself, Veronica. Sign the agreement. It's your best chance at salvaging any kind of future." As Veronica's manicured hand hovered over the dotted line, she couldn't help but reflect on the choices that had led her to this moment. Her pursuit of revenge had cost her everything, while the very family she had sought to destroy had emerged stronger than ever. With a resigned sigh, she signed the document. As she did, across the city, life went on for the newly expanded Montero Ramirez family. In the Montero mansion's sprawling garden, a large table had been set up for an impromptu family dinner. Sophia and Maria worked side by side, arranging flowers and place settings, their initial awkwardness giving way to a genuine camaraderie. Victor and Carlos stood at the grill, arguing good-naturedly about the best way to cook the steaks. Their shared love for Eva had created a bridge between their vastly different worlds, and though the path forward was uncertain, both men were committed to making it work. And at the center of it all, Eva and James sat on the garden swing, heads bent close as they looked through an old photo album. They laughed at baby pictures, marveled at the similarities in their features they had never noticed before, and shared bittersweet memories of the relationship they had lost and the new one they were building. As the sun began to set, casting a warm golden glow over the scene, Eva looked around at the mismatched group that now made up her family. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't what she had planned. But as she met James's eyes and saw the same mix of love, grief, and hope reflected back at her, she realized that perhaps it was exactly what she needed. The story of the lost Montero heiress would be told for years to come, inspiring books, movies, and countless dinner party conversations. But for those living it, it was simply life, messy, complicated, and utterly, beautifully human. As night fell and the stars began to twinkle overhead, the newly formed family raised their glasses in a toast. To second chances, to love in all its forms, and to the unbreakable bonds of family. Both those we're born into and those we choose. The scandal that had threatened to tear them apart had, in the end, brought them together in ways none of them could have imagined. And as they looked to the future, they did so not as separate entities, but as a united front, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. For in the end, they had discovered that family, true family, was not defined by blood alone, but by the love, understanding, and forgiveness that bound them together. And in that, they had found a happy ending far more meaningful than any fairy tale romance could have provided. 1 year later, the Montero mansion, once a symbol of cold opulence, now buzzed with the warm chaos of family life. Laughter echoed through its hallways, and the aroma of home-cooked meals often wafted from the kitchen, a far cry from the formal, catered affairs of the past. In the sun-drenched conservatory, Eva sat curled up on a plush sofa, a leather-bound journal open on her lap. Her pen hovered over the blank page as she contemplated the whirlwind of the past year. Still working on that book? James's voice startled her from her reverie. He leaned against the doorframe, a gentle smile playing on his lips. Eva nodded, gesturing for him to join her. I think it's important to tell our story, the real story. Not the sensationalized version the media ran with, but the messy, complicated truth. James settled beside her, his eyes scanning the few lines she had managed to write. And what truth is that? That family isn't just about blood, Eva replied, her voice soft but firm. It's about choice. It's about love that adapts and grows, even when faced with impossible circumstances. As if on cue, a commotion from the main hall drew their attention. Victor's booming laugh mingled with Carlos's more reserved chuckle, while Sophia and Maria's excited chatter drifted through the open door. Speaking of impossible circumstances, James grinned, rising to his feet and offering Eva his hand. Shall we see what the parents are up to now? In the grand foyer, they found both sets of parents engaged in what had become a familiar scene of organized chaos. Sophia and Maria were poring over seating charts and menu options, while Victor and Carlos debated the merits of various charitable initiatives. Ah, there you are, Victor exclaimed upon seeing James and Eva. We were just discussing the final arrangements for the gala. The Montero Ramirez Foundation for Family Reunification is going to make a real difference, I can feel it. Eva felt a warmth bloom in her chest. The foundation, born from their own extraordinary circumstances, had become a passion project for the entire family. It aimed to help adopted children and their biological families navigate reunions, providing support and resources for those grappling with complex emotions and changing family dynamics. We've already had so many families reach out, Maria added, her eyes shining with pride. Your story has given hope to so many people, Mija. As the family fell into a spirited discussion about the upcoming gala, Eva couldn't help but marvel at the scene before her. A year ago, the idea of her two families coming together like this would have seemed impossible. Now, it was their new normal, beautiful in its complexity and imperfection. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink, the extended Montero Ramirez clan gathered on the mansion's expansive back terrace for their weekly family dinner. The long table groaned under the weight of an eclectic mix of dishes. Maria's spicy paella sat alongside Sophia's elegant coq au vin, while Carlos's homemade salsa and Victor's carefully selected wines represented a culinary bridge between their two worlds. As they settled into their seats, a comfortable silence fell over the group. Victor, at the head of the table, cleared his throat, raising his glass in what had become a weekly tradition. To family, he began, his voice thick with emotion. To second chances and new beginnings. To love that knows no boundaries. To truth, James added, meeting Eva's eyes across the table. And the freedom it brings. To forgiveness, Carlos chimed in, nodding at Victor. And the bridges it builds. To the family we're born with, Maria said, squeezing Eva's hand. And the family we choose, Sophia finished, her gaze encompassing everyone at the table. As they clinked glasses, Eva felt a sense of peace wash over her. The past year had been a journey of rediscovery, of herself, of her place in the world, and of the true meaning of family. It hadn't been easy. There had been tears, arguments, and moments of doubt. But there had also been laughter, understanding, and a love so profound it defied conventional labels. After dinner, as the family dispersed to various corners of the estate, Eva found herself drawn to the library. The wall of family portraits, once a source of pain and confusion, now told a different story. New photos had been added, candid shots of both families together, a formal portrait of all of them at the foundation's launch, and at the center, a photo of Eva flanked by all four of her parents. It was a visual representation of their unconventional journey, a testament to the power of love and acceptance. "It's quite a sight, isn't it?" Victor's voice came from behind her. He moved to stand beside Eva, his eyes roaming over the photos. "It's perfect," Eva replied, leaning her head on her father's shoulder. "All of it. The good, the bad, the complicated, it's us." Victor wrapped an arm around her, pulling her close. "I missed so much of your life, Isabella. Eva, there were times I thought the pain of losing you would destroy me. But now, having you here, seeing the amazing woman you've become, I'm grateful for every moment we have." Eva felt tears prick at her eyes. "I'm grateful too, Dad. For all of it. For the parents who raised me, for you and Sophia, for the brother I never knew I had. Even for the pain. It all led us here." As they stood there, surrounded by the visible proof of their family's evolution, Eva's mind wandered to the future. The foundation's work was just beginning, and she knew there would be challenges ahead. But she also knew that with her family by her side, all of them, she could face anything. Across town, in a small, nondescript apartment, Veronica DuPont sat alone, staring at a television screen that displayed footage of the Montero Ramirez Foundation's latest event. Her face, once the picture of smug superiority, now bore the signs of a woman haunted by her past actions. The public apology and subsequent exile from high society had been a bitter pill to swallow. But as she watched Eva and James speak passionately about the Foundation's mission, Veronica felt something unexpected, a twinge of regret, not for her own downfall, but for the pain she had tried to inflict on others. With a heavy sigh, she reached for her laptop. Perhaps it was time to make amends in a more meaningful way. Her fingers hovered over the keys for a moment before she began to type. "Dear Eva and James, I know I'm probably the last person you want to hear from, but I hope you'll give me a chance to explain." Meanwhile, back at the Montero mansion, the family had gathered in the cozy media room for their weekly movie night. It was James's turn to choose, and as the opening credits of a classic romantic comedy rolled, good-natured groans and teasing comments filled the air. Eva, sandwiched between James and Maria on the plush sofa, felt a surge of contentment. This was her family, not the one she was born to, not the one that raised her, but a beautiful amalgamation of both. It was messy and complicated and utterly perfect. As the movie played on, Eva's mind drifted to the journal waiting in her room, pages still blank, waiting for her to tell their extraordinary tale. She knew now what she would write, not a story of scandal or loss, but one of resilience, of love that adapts and grows, of family bonds forged in the fires of adversity. Their story wasn't over. In many ways, it was just beginning. There would be more challenges to face, more moments of joy and heartache. The Foundation's work would bring them into contact with other families grappling with similar situations, each with their own unique struggles and triumphs. But as Eva looked around at the faces of her loved ones, bathed in the flickering light of the television screen, she knew that whatever came next, they would face it together. They had weathered the storm of scandal, emerged from the shadows of long-buried secrets, and come out stronger on the other side. In the end, the tale of the lost Montero heiress wasn't just about rediscovering a lost child or navigating the murky waters of unexpected family connections. It was a testament to the enduring power of love, the strength found in vulnerability, and the beauty of a family redefined. As the credits rolled and the family fell into a heated debate about the movie's merits, Eva slipped out onto the balcony, gazing up at the star-studded sky. A warm breeze caressed her face, carrying with it the promise of new beginnings. She thought of all the families out there, struggling with their own secrets and scandals, feeling alone and overwhelmed. If their story could offer hope, could show that it was possible to build something beautiful from the ashes of devastation, then perhaps all the pain had been worth it. Eva took a deep breath, feeling a sense of purpose settle over her. Tomorrow, she would start writing their story in earnest. She would pour her heart onto those pages, sharing their journey with the world, the tears and the laughter, the setbacks and the triumphs. Because in the end, theirs was a story of hope. A story that proved that family wasn't defined by blood alone, but by the choices we make and the love we share. It was a story of second chances and new beginnings, of forgiveness and growth. As she turned to rejoin her family, Eva paused for a moment, taking in the scene before her. James, animatedly explaining some point about the movie. Victor and Carlos, united in their playful exasperation at their children's antics. Sophia and Maria, heads bent close as they shared some private joke. This was her family, unconventional, unexpected, and utterly irreplaceable. With a smile on her lips and love in her heart, Eva stepped back into the warmth of the room, ready to embrace whatever the future might hold. Because she knew now, without a doubt, that as long as they had each other, they could weather any storm. The scandal that had threatened to tear them apart had only made them stronger. And in that strength, they had found a happily ever after far more meaningful than any fairy tale could have provided. Behind the scenes, in a luxurious green room, James and Eva stood side by side, staring at their reflections in an ornate mirror. The irony of their matching dark suits, once chosen for a very different kind of ceremony, was not lost on either of them.